Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Joining us today is John Pullman, a contributing freelance writer for Ducks Unlimited magazine and a contributing writer for ducks.org, and also a friend of the DU podcast. John, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, great to be back with you, Chris.
Now, I asked John to come on, and we're going to talk some off-season waterfowl hunting, some different things that he's doing out there. But John lives in South Dakota, and he, driving around, he has his eyes on the habitat out there. So, John, can you provide us a little update on the habitat, the breeding habitat there in South Dakota?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's probably not going to come as any surprise what I'm going to talk about today. I think folks if you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard other guests have been on the podcast talk about how, conditions really across the prairie pothole region are rather dry this year. And South Dakota is no exception to that. When ducks started pushing back up north, late March into April, we just did not have the wetland conditions to stop a lot of those birds. We had some carryover water from last year where, larger wetland basins, your semi-permanents, they have some water in them now. Or earlier in the spring. But those shallow, temporary, semi-permanent, temporary wetlands, they were just dry and they remain so now. We just haven't had enough moisture to get those things recharged. And so what we're seeing out there right now is where you're finding water, some of these larger wetlands, you're going to see ducks here in South Dakota. I saw some just yesterday, drove past kind of a larger semi-permanent wetland in the middle of a pasture, and there were 5, 6, 7 drake mallards, lone drakes out there loafing around, which to me suggests that there's a hen nearby nesting in the pasture. But those little small wetlands that just really drive duck production, we don't have them this year. And so it's and I think Dr. Scott Stevens mentioned this on earlier podcasts, that it's what makes this unique this year is that we're seeing these conditions kind of widespread throughout the prairie pothole region. And so we're probably looking at, duck production that's going to be down this year. But there's an ebb and flow to these wetland conditions here, and on the prairie, and we need those wetlands to draw down from time to time, really, to recharge so that when the water does return, that they're that much more productive. As a duck guy, I love to see green grass and wetlands full, but I also know that it's just part of the cycle. And, hopefully, we have caught some rains here in the last few weeks, that's been enough to kind of keep the grass green. It's been enough to kind of help farmers get their crops up and out of the ground. And if we catch a few more rains, they will certainly benefit, maybe some late nesting efforts, whether that's gaddies or shovelers or blooming teal or whatever. If we get enough rain here, it's still we're in May, but if we would get enough rain, the ducks they'll find that water, if we get enough of it and put on a nesting effort here yet this summer. But again, overall, it's not great. From a hunting standpoint, I'm guessing we probably aren't going to see as many local birds next fall. But hopefully we catch some rain here over the course of the summer. Next winter, we get a little better snowpack so that we can see these wetlands recharged. And, it's a waiting game at this point. But overall, it's the conditions we have this year are not what we've had in years prior, where we've just kicked out a boatload of ducks. I don't expect that this year to happen. And like I say, it's just part of the cycle of the prairie.
Yeah. And, just speaking to the cycle of it, you were on the podcast last year, even early in the fall, talking about difficult hunting conditions because you had so much water.
Yeah.
And you had some of these larger wetlands or smaller wetlands that actually ended up being larger because you had so much water.
Yeah.
And it's just, how different, one year makes in that. And you're right to say that, it's not always a bad thing. We all look at it as, low duck production due to the habitat is definitely bad. But like you said, for the habitat, sometimes it's beneficial to have that drought. That's how these, temporary wetlands recharge and build back. And, that's how they fluctuate. So, It's not all bad news, I guess. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Exactly. And not to get out in front of my skis here too far, but where there would be reason for concern is if we have several years of this, back to back to back to back. And that's when you're going to really start to see a significant impact. We've been enjoying some really good duck production for the last, overall duck production for the last, going back to when I, first started duck hunting, in all honesty, it's been a while since we've had, widespread dry conditions. And so, that day is coming someday down the road. But for right now, this is, we're just looking at a 1-year deal at the moment. And, it is. It's a part of the ebb and flow of what happens here on the prairie. And honestly, it's what makes it kind of a special place too.
Yeah. And, there's, always discussion whenever it's dry. There's always discussions, really from, just hunters, more like us rather than the waterfowl managers talking, restricted limits and, some restricted seasons and some changing, because we've always been so accustomed to that liberal framework. And you and I are in that generation of we've pretty much had that the whole time. We've not really, I know I have not hunted in in anything other than a or liberal framework. And that's something to start looking at and, the potential down the road. But like you said, we're way far away from that right now. And hopefully, but I just hear that's kind of the word on the street. You see people on chat forums and online and they're already talking, gloom and doom here. But hopefully, like you said, you get some rains and things change.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's roll on to, it is May. We're a long way from duck season, but people like you and I, and there's a lot of our listeners out there just like us who are constantly thinking about duck season, whether it's a change in tactics or a change in gear or, some new ground to hunt or anything. The waterfowl season for us is year round. And I always make the joke that, people are always like, oh man, you probably love your job. You get to, duck hunt here and there. And I'm like, yeah, but during May, when you're talking about crappie fishing and going to the lake, I'm still sitting talking about duck hunting, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But I wanted to bring you on here and kind of talk about some of the off-season things that you're doing, and maybe some people can pick up some tips on that and possibly even get some people motivated to start preparing for the fall. So what are some things that you're focusing on right now at this time of year?
Absolutely. Well, I'm staring at one of those things I'm working on, and he's about 6 feet from me, laying on my office chair. That's my yellow lab. There really isn't an off season, and we talk about an off season, when we're not actually out in the field doing things. But there's always, like you said, there's always lots of things to do. And as a dog owner, my hunting dog is a top priority in the off season, just to keep him in shape, keep his skills, relatively sharp. The vet that I use is so adamant, and he's always constantly reminding me about how, as hunters, we can't expect our dogs to go out on opening day and perform like a super athlete if they've been laying on the couch or an office chair all summer. And so I feel it's my duty to make sure that he's in good shape. And so we go on daily walks and runs and do some marks on a daily basis. And I know folks will recommend one of the things that you can do to kind of spur that growth or that keeping your dog in tip top shape is maybe looking at joining a retriever club in the area, someplace where you can meet other people, work your dog with the help of other people. So that would be one great thing for someone to do. But if you don't have a club locally that you can do that through, just in all honesty, enlisting the help of a friend, whether your buddy's got a dog or not, someone that can help you throw marks while you handle the dog to do some of the training aspect of it. But one way or the other, get your pup outside, take walks, run, throw marks, keep them in shape so that when fall comes, your dog is ready to go.
Yeah, and that's a good point that we've talked about many times on here, especially with some trainers and some kennel owners who talk about avoiding injuries. And we'll continue to have other podcasts later in this season about injury avoidance. But one of the biggest injuries is because dogs are laying around all summer, and then all of a sudden it's hey, it's go time, and they expect that dog to get out there and really get after it when they're just not in shape to do it. It's just like a professional athlete. So, that's a good one. And another thing, and this is something that just kind of popped up to me, and I know something that you can probably elaborate on, is this is a good time of year to take your shotgun apart, break it down, really go through it, give it a really proper cleaning, and maybe even take it somewhere to have it done professionally.
Exactly. I shot the same gas operated semi-auto for 20 years, from Prairie, Canada to Maryland to Missouri, Arkansas, here in the Dakotas. I took that gun everywhere, but it was a fickle gun that I had to keep it really clean during the season for it to operate efficiently. You operate really well. But what I learned, several years into it, is that in the off season, if I took the time to break it down and really thoroughly clean it, and eventually I started taking it into a gun shop just so they could take the spring out of the stock and really break it down and clean all of it, is that if I took some time in the off season to really put some time into cleaning it, getting it in tip top shape, when hunting season came, the minimum maintenance, I'll be honest, it's one of those things that falls to the side when hunting season is here. But, if I did some minimal maintenance to it then during the season, I could get a lot more miles out of it. And I'll tell you what, there are a few things worse for me as a duck hunter than denying my dog a retrieve because my gun didn't cycle a shell or something because it wasn't clean. And let that happen a couple times to me, and I'll remember that it's taking care of my gun has got to be something that I do. And the off season is a really good time to do that.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than pulling up and knowing that your gun didn't go off because you were just not being efficient with your time and not paying attention to, the random maintenance that you should be doing anyway. Exactly. That can be frustrating. But yeah, it's a good time to do it, and taking it in somewhere, taking it to a gunsmith, letting them go all the way through it, break it down. I've taken guns apart and just had, everything from, wheat and barley seeds falling out of the receiver to, stalks of grass, and, who knows what was in there. So, it's a good idea to go ahead and do that on a regular basis, but the summertime is definitely a good time.
Absolutely. I've had whole pieces of cattail. A piece that's several inches long come out of the magazine of my gun. It's a good reminder that it's something that you need to do.
Yeah. And that kind of, that leads me to my next one here, on my little short list here of notes. And I don't know how much you're into this, and this may be something that you're really into, because we've not really talked about it, but learning a waterfowl recipe. Like what is your go-to waterfowl recipe? I guess that's a good question.
Oh boy, Chris, how much time do we have? Cause I could talk food. I could talk food all day. Lately what I've been doing is, last summer I purchased a wood burning oven for outside. And so I've been using that for just about all of my cooking. And so my go-to recipe the last couple of years, or last year in particular, is a pan searing a skin on duck breast, whether that's a wood duck, mallard, whatever it is, pan searing it on one side and then finishing in that oven, and then making a sauce, with the drippings, adding some butter and shallots and red wine and stuff like that. That is absolutely my favorite way to eat a bird right now. For years, I did we call it ramaki, which is just a bacon wrap, piece of duck that's been soaked in some Italian dressing, stuff like that. So I've been trying to grow as a duck chef over the last several years, but that pan-seared skin on duck breast is my favorite way to do it these days. I've last year, I think I spatchcocked one. I cut the backbone out of one and did the same thing. I grilled it. I did that one just on the grill, with some plum sauce. There aren't a lot of people in my immediate family that will eat wild game, so I'm usually probably one of the only ones that will do it. But those are probably my favorite ways to do it, on the grill or in the oven. It's when done correctly, and I don't always do it correctly, but when it's done correctly, it's the taste of that mallard, especially when you know that you shot it and you brought it home. It's something special. And especially when you can share it with friends, a hunting buddy or whatever that, maybe was with you that day. I really enjoy cooking it up, but that's probably those two, that grilling that spatchcock duck, skin on, plucked, or the skin on breast and the seared and then put in the oven. Those are my two favorite ways right now.
Yeah, and you're right. The way that, when you get it right, I should say, is that's just perfection. And that's also for me what I've learned is when because I'm always messing with different recipes, especially talking to some of the people that we have on the podcast about recipes and things like that. I'm always trying something, and I've ruined a lot, I'll be honest. But I've also gotten to where I'll cook something that, I have a lot of people that aren't really familiar with wild game and wild duck, but I'll get one right, and it kind of opens people's eyes to the opportunities. And they're like, oh man, that's great. And then they're like, oh, well, maybe we should try this and add something. So it really, kind of opens the door for people, to also get involved. Especially during the off season, it's great to introduce people to it and introduce people to new recipes and wild game in general. And next thing you know, someone will be motivated to go with you that normally wouldn't. And I think that's a cool part about it. And this is a great time of year, to focus on those recipes. One of the best things that I've done, and is very similar, that I started doing last year, mainly out of an abundance of, speckle belly breast, was pan searing the speckle belly breast skin on. And just, then thinly slice, serve with a little bit of rice, make up any kind of sauce or, anything you want. I was doing very light marinade, almost like a teriyaki on it for, 45 minutes to an hour before throwing it on. And man, that's just a great recipe. That's just so simple. It's basic. And for some reason, even people who don't eat waterfowl on a regular basis, they'll get into that. And I think the very light flavoring of the speckle belly lends everything to that recipe, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a progression as duck cooks or waterfowl cooks or chefs that, you start with those things where, it seems like you probably add a lot of ingredients to it. Sometimes it somehow kind of masks the actual taste of the wild bird a little bit. But as I've gotten older, I appreciate more and more and more that the actual taste of that bird. And again, like I say, it's, if I can have a morning or a day where I go out in the morning and shoot some birds, and my buddy and I that night can grill them up or cook them up, and a nice glass of wine, and there's nothing better. I mean, that to me is like the epitome of a waterfowl hunting experience, is seeing it go from the field to the table in a day, or it doesn't have to happen a day, but just brings it full circle when you can share it with somebody, share it with somebody that you like to hunt, or someone that's in your family, like you mentioned. And if they aren't a hunter, like it's a good gateway to show them how special of an experience this is. But it's absolutely, cooking those birds is an absolute essential part of the experience for me.
The next one on my list is something, and you've written a lot of articles about different variations of this. So I think this is a good question for you. Planning a dream trip, planning I think you've done articles on extreme hunts and even freelance in the prairie pothole region. You've done different variations of this. And the cool thing about this is it's different for everyone. What one guy's plan or dream trip might be is totally different from what yours would be. So, kind of explain how you would go about, planning your dream trip.
Sure. Well, planning a dream trip in the off season it's a great way to pass the time. I mean, it gives you a lot of fun things to think about, but it's also it's the absolute right time to do it, just from a logistical standpoint, because sometimes putting these things together, it takes time. And it's whether that is, getting your license or making, travel arrangements, things like that. I've got a lot of places that I've been blessed to be able to hunt ducks and geese in a lot of different places, but there are a number of locations that are still on my list where I'd love to go someday. It's not to get too philosophical here, but we've only got so many years on this earth. And so it's one of those things where at some point you really have to get down and do it and make a list of those places that are maybe a little bit more practical to begin with. And practical may mean from a money standpoint or from a time standpoint. But make a list of them and find a way to try to start checking them off the list. It's going someplace new is, is a great way to meet new people. You somehow find a way to connect with like-minded folks from different parts of the country when you go there. Folks that are as passionate as you are about, ducks and geese and wetlands and grasslands and the migration and whatever it may be. But that's the first thing for me is I have a list drawn up, and here are the places that I know that I can probably check off while I'm still, I've got a young family and things like that. And the summer the off season is a great time to do that. But that's the first step. Put that list together and kind of put an order of, I know I can do this. And maybe at the bottom of the list is something that's pretty exotic or expensive or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And you can go about this in several different ways too. It doesn't just have to be someplace I've never been. I mean, it can be, maybe someone is targeting a specific species,
Oh, sure.
or wants to be on one of the picturesque canvasback hunts and has to plan that trip to the upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge area, up there on the Mississippi River, the different pools where you can get on those just epic canvasback hunts, or even a coastal hunt, something like that. So, that's another approach to it. Have you kind of approached it just as places you've never been, or have you done it by species where like, I want to shoot mallards in the timber?
I'll be honest with you. There was a day and time where I kind of had things, I wanted to shoot a stud drake pintail down in the, coastal Texas or Mexico. Birds that we don't see in full plumage up here in South Dakota and early in the fall. That for me, those were hunts that I wanted to take. Montana, places where for me, it was new experiences. But over the last 10, 11 years, since, my oldest son, Miles, was born, my dream hunts have started to revolve around what I want him to experience. And those don't necessarily have to take me as far away from home. And it may be things that I've already experienced as well, but I want to see him, and his younger brother, Max, too, when he gets older, see him experience those things. And so my dream hunt list has shifted in the last decade, just based on my situation. There are certain locations that I have not been that are just iconic. I have been out to Chesapeake Bay, hunted the Eastern Shore, but I haven't done a whole lot of hunting out in Western U.S., whether that's Sacramento Valley down in California, the Pacific Northwest, so there still are those locations, Canada on the Eastern Seaboard, whether that's Prince Edward Island or wherever, shooting a black duck, out on the East Coast somewhere. So those parts of my dream list are still there, but in all honesty, right now, my top dream hunt is seeing my boy shoot his first duck. And that could happen 5 miles. That could happen 5 miles from home for me for right now. And so trying to lay the groundwork, to make that happen is my top focus right now. But someday, hopefully, my boys will travel with me to Prairie, Canada, or down to Arkansas, hunt flooded timber, all those other places that are on my list. And, but we're going to start with baby steps right now.
That's right. Baby steps. Yeah. I just had Field Hudnall on the show, and we kind of talked about his boys are, I wanted to say 4 and 8, maybe, right around that age group, 5 and 8, right around there, which is very similar to my daughters. And we talked a lot about, the introductions to hunting and how he's doing it and how I'm doing it. And it was a pretty thorough conversation, but that's one thing for the off season, that people can really focus on is getting a younger hunter. It may not even be your kids, but getting a younger hunter interested in it, in the process. Are there any things that you're doing with your boys now that you're just keeping them engaged with waterfowl hunting? And it may just be working with the dog as well. But anything else that you may be doing with the kids to keep them engaged?
Yeah, spending time outside. In all honesty, we do a lot of camping in the summer. Spending time outside, my boys get tired of me pointing out different ducks, did you see that type of a deal. But that's part of our focus right now is just being outside, spending time with, we still shoot BB gun and pellet gun, out at my dad's place, chasing blackbirds and stuff like that. And gun safety. My oldest has started to express some interest in, duck calling. So starting to teach him the first steps on what to do with the duck call. you kind of go at their pace, and my experience is different from yours, which is probably different from Fields, and it's different from everybody else. But those are some of the bigger things we're doing right now. And in terms of the duck call, I think that's a great way to, every kid likes to get on a duck call and make noise. And so, and it doesn't have to be your own child to do this, but if you find a group of kids that you can get in front of and start teaching them the basics of duck calling and those first three notes down the kind of coming down the ladder, that's a great thing to do over the course of the summer. And there's loads of instructional videos online that you can show whether you're trying to polish your own skills or teach a new hunter as well. There's loads of things you can find online to do that. But any time that you invest in kids is an investment in the future of the sport. And so it's you can't go wrong no matter what you do in the off season if you're spending time with kids.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, we talked a little bit about, just the pace of kids learning, and it's all different. And you hit on that where, some kids are going to be more interested in other things. But I was just kind of thinking to myself, kind of chuckling that here in about 4 or 5 years, your wife is going to have all three of you just wailing on duck calls in the front room. You guys are going to get kicked out of the house. She's going to make you guys go outside, like get out back, even when it's cold. That's going to be a great day.
With all due respect to my wife, I look forward to that day when if my boys are wanting to learn the duck call and we're making that much noise. Awesome. I'm all for it.
Absolutely. That's great. Another thing that people do in the off season, and I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit, but focusing on decoys, kind of looking at what you had and what you used and what you would want to use. Is there any specific, maybe a spread or something that you're adding to that you've looked online? I spent a lot of time just cruising around the internet looking at different decoys. And is there anything that you're going to add to your spread for next year?
I'm basically just updating some of the decoys that I have. And it's just all part of me being, I love new hunting gear. I mean, I could probably get by with some of the stuff I have, but I like to try out new things. I've made a turn to using a lot of silhouettes in my field spreads, just for ease of transportation, if nothing else. And they're effective, by and large. And so that's largely what I'm going to do is I've got some older ones that I'm going to replace with some newer silos. I have hunted with Texas rig duck decoys for the last 4 or 5 years. But this year I'm planning on doing a little bit of hunting in some deeper water. And so rigging some of those with little longer lines that can handle, I think the Texas rigs I have are 4 feet, the lines on them. And so I'm going to be restringing some decoys to be able to handle a little bit deeper water situation. Going back to a previous point, this is a perfect activity to do with the kids, just to get them involved. They love setting the decoys out in the yard, whether if we're wiping them down and just trying to clean things up a little bit. It's something great to do with them. But yeah, just that's my main focus for the decoys this summer is just updating a little bit, getting a few new styles decoys, some silos, and that's about it. But that's a fun job to do on a summer afternoon, is to break everything out, get everything set out in the yard. And the neighbors think I'm kind of weird, but they understand I'm a duck hunter. So
that's funny. Yeah, I can imagine your neighbors watching you set out a decoy spread in your front yard.
It's happened more than once.
I think we've all done it. And that's funny you mentioned the silhouettes, because we've talked about that a lot. Not necessarily on the podcast, but kind of in the office a little bit. The reintroduction of the silhouette decoy to today's hunter's arsenal has been a pretty drastic change of event, and I'm part of it. I mean, I switched to a ton of silhouettes last year hunting in Arkansas, and did not notice a fall off on decoying birds. And that's just, it used to be so common. That's what everyone hunted with. And then we all switched to these full bodied, fully flocked, super realistic, and then we all realized that, man, I'm going to have to buy an 18 wheeler to haul all these things around.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what the change is. Just, trying to get more numbers without the hassle of having to haul them all around, whether out in the field or even storage those things. That's what I like about them. Is that kind of why you switched to the silhouette?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I don't like to take a trailer if I don't have to, and so with silhouettes, I can fit basically my entire rig inside the back of the truck. And that's dog blind, or, my dog kennel, a couple of blinds and 10 dozen silhouette decoys. And for 10 dozen full body decoys, I would have to take a trailer. I mean, it's just one of those things. And so the change I made was out of space. It was to kind of try something different again. I'd used full body decoys for a long time, and they're effective, and I think there's still a time and a place for them. But it was, I watched my friends be really successful for both ducks and geese running simply silhouettes, and I saw how easy they were to put in the ground, and I saw how realistic they looked. The images have gotten, have improved greatly on them, and I thought, let's give this a whirl. And at this point, there's no looking back. They are my go-to for field hunting right now. And they work. That's what, and like you said, they've been around for a long time. And the reason they have been is that they're effective.
Yeah. Have you gone to silhouettes on the duck side of things yet, or
in the field? Yes.
I'm going to try that this year, against the better judgment of my hunting partners who are adamant that I do not use silhouette ducks. I'm going to do it probably when they're not there. But I did a hunt out in Salt Lake several years back where they used all silhouettes. And they weren't even detailed silhouettes. I mean, it was like a black silhouette duck, and it really, really worked out there. I think a lot of that had to do with the reflections off the water, the bright sun, the way that the Salt Lake is just like a shallow, just as far as you can see. And it really created the perfect situation for silhouettes. And my eyes were really opened by that. And I think I can recreate that same scenario in Arkansas. But I can't get anybody to go with me because they don't think it's going to work. So.
And I should say, in the field for ducks, for me, I mean, literally in the field, in a cornfield, wheat field, something like that. I will use silhouettes though over water if we're in a shallow water situation where, whether it's a little flooded spot in a low spot, in a wheat field or a bean stubble field, something like that. I think they look super realistic because that's, if you throw a handful of floaters in there, that's exactly what the birds look like when they're out in those spots. They're standing, feeding in that shallow water, and those silhouettes can be a great addition. And if we've got something where, especially this year, where things are looking to be pretty dry in South Dakota, the use of silhouettes up on like a muddy shoreline, are a great way to add some more visibility, and they're a great way to maybe help hide a dog blind or something like that, or your layout blind if you're setting up on a mud flat. They can be a great way to add, like I say, some color and some concealment there as well in a situation like that. But they're a versatile tool, and I certainly encourage hunters to, if you don't have any in your arsenal at this point, there's some good ones out there. Go ahead and take a look at them.
Yeah, and it's always good. This is the time of year where you put that plan together. You certainly don't want to be trying to order decoys, 2 weeks before the season comes in, especially now what we've seen over the course of the last 6-8 months. We've had some shipping issues, and the timing of that has not always worked out. So what you really want to do is put together a plan now, get that ball rolling, maybe even, like you said, jot down your list and jump on it. So, and John, is there anything else that you're doing this off season that you think our listeners would be, interested in and maybe, want to try?
The thing that I do most often, is just observe. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but I in the off season, whenever I'm out driving, I'm looking around, and there's a practical side to that. And there's just an enjoyment side of it too. I love just going out and watching birds, whether that's here in South Dakota, whether that's ducks, geese, pheasants, grouse, whatever, turkeys, whatever it is. I just like being out there. It adds to my overall enjoyment as a hunter, being able to see them kind of year round. I've seen goslings so far this year. I haven't seen any duck broods yet, but I know they're not far behind. I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't seen any myself. But, I like just to be out there taking a drive. I'll take a different route to go someplace if I know I'm going to be able to drive by a slough or a marsh complex or whatever it may be. And then there's the practical side to it too. And in terms of when I'm out and about right now, I'm looking at what crops are going in where. I'm paying attention to maybe farmers that are maybe switching to that are going to be providing some silage for a dairy in the area. So I know they're going to have some corn chopped early, which is an early goose and wood duck spot that I can maybe look at, in September. Looking at it from a hunting standpoint, always through a hunter's eyes. Water conditions, this wetland is dried up. This one's holding water. Just always being an observer. I think it pays to be curious. I think as a duck hunter, it pays to always kind of have your eyes open. And like I say, always look at things through the eyes of a hunter. But that's above and beyond. That's the one thing I do most of all is I'm always just looking. It's just something I really enjoy, and it drives, like I mentioned before, it drives my boys nuts. It drives my wife crazy once in a while when I'm pointing out different things, but it's just one of the things that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it also drives the guy driving behind you nuts too, because you're probably like me, like half pulling over, slowing down, half on the road, people honking at you. You probably don't have that much of a problem in South Dakota as much as we do around here with the traffic, but I'm sure there's someone who's complaining about you slowing down for sure.
Yeah, every once in a while, you'll catch yourself doing pulling off to the side and probably not paying as much attention as you should. But yeah, my binoculars are on the front dash of my truck year round for that very reason.
As they should be. Well, John, this has been great. Great conversation. I hope, our audience picked up a few things that they can focus on this summer. Even if it's, just introducing kids to calling, picking out their decoy spread, or like you said, just really spending time out there watching the birds. So it's been fantastic. I appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
I'd like to thank my guest, John Pullman, contributing freelance writer for Ducks Unlimited. I'd like to thank our producer, Clay Baird, for putting the podcast together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us in supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.